know that people tend to stay and work in the areas where they've been educated and trained. How will you expand and enhance construction-related training for apprenticeship and trades in the North?
I touched on that a little bit in my comments, and so part of it is the job match program that we've been doing with BCCA, which has been really important. Part of it is the job fairs and the work that we're doing across the province to try and connect people very directly with jobs in the region. We've also been doing regional workforce skills tables, and the BC Construction Association has been extremely helpful across the province in that. And that's been going on for over a year now, and what we are doing is we're sitting down with the private sector, organized labor, educational institutions, community groups, and government, and saying on a regional basis, how can we predict the needs of this local economy for the next 10 and 20 years? Then trying to match up our regional education training outcomes to that. So, for example, this is a very broad example, but in British Columbia, every year we train more than 1,000 extra teachers than we could ever hope to hire. Young people go and they get a teaching degree and they come out and they're frustrated that they can't find work. But it's because we as government are investing, you as taxpayers are investing in many more training spaces for teaching than we require. Meanwhile, we have a terrible shortage of other skills, and from truck drivers to engineers. We're trying to use the workforce tables as a way to reorient that so that we can start providing the training that regions will need over the next 10 or 20 years because we predicted it well. It won't be perfect, but it will be better than what we're doing now, which we've done historically, which is basically no planning. So we're trying to impose that level of planning on the system, and again, make sure that it's regionally based. The BC Training Tax Credit Program has been very successful on a regional basis. And in terms of apprenticeships, there are 2,700 apprenticeship and foundation training seats at institutions across the North. We're going to continue to expand that in the North, and we're also going to continue to invest, and we did this, Pat Bell and I did this announcement, the $75 million training plan to make a very significant investment in improving the facilities that are there. So it's not just the number of seats, but it's also improving the facilities that are there. And I know we have a lot more work to do on apprenticeship, but we are really making some very good progress. Pat Bell, since he's taken this over, in particular, has really given it some focus. I also think, too, he didn't ask about this, but there is a vast underutilized workforce in First Nations who are very much tied to the communities in which they grew up. And that's a real opportunity for us, vastly underemployed. 50% don't even graduate from high school. We have to do a much better job at bringing that workforce skills up to a level where they can enrich the communities in which they live, which is fantastic for everybody all across the province, and also supply that ready-made labor that you are going to require. So this is something I hear everywhere I go all across the province. But there are three parts of it. One is skills training, and we've got to skill people up. But you know what, as I always say to the opposition, it's one thing we have to skill people up, absolutely, for jobs that are going to be here in British Columbia. So then we have to make sure that the jobs actually exist, and we also have to make sure that we have customers for what it is we're creating, particularly in mining, forestry, natural gas in the North. Those are the three legs of the table, and we are dedicated to making sure that every one of them works.
It's a great question. In some ways, it's the question, and I was talking about it earlier that there's a lot of debate about the Tumbler Ridge mine. But in the long run, I think we have to acknowledge that if we don't have skilled workers from the region, and you have projects that are important and raise a lot of royalty for the province, that money comes to Victoria, may go back. A lot of people in the North don't like how that works sometimes, I think it's fair to say. If we don't have people from the region working in those jobs, and those jobs aren't using suppliers in the region as much as they need, then there's front-end construction jobs, but often you have the impacts of the mines without any of the benefits. And that's a significant problem in regions, so skills training is important in that sense. If you look at your areas of the North, you've got an undersupply of labor in the Northeast, which has significant impacts, I'm sure, on costs, but also on economic development itself. You can't find enough workers, it affects economic development. In the Northwest, we're seeing that as well. So here's just a few thoughts about that. One, just because you talked about the regulatory climate, no capital tax, not coming. No change in the small business tax. For the election, we're saying where the corporate income tax is going to go, which is from 10 to 12%. As you know, the government announced in its last budget they're going from 10 to 11%. And there's a debate about that, but that's not, I think, a significant change with that money going to largely to invest in infrastructure in regions. And I think the question raises a good point, which is in the north we have the young population is also increasingly First Nations. And the realism of having people go from Hazelton or Terrace or Prince George or wherever down to Vancouver and then come back, and the success of that has generally not been high. So we absolutely have to invest. We've got outstanding institutions across the province, but I don't think the investment we have in trades and training is adequate in the north. So we've got to do two sets of things, it seems to me, to prepare for that. One, yes, increase the spaces, but we have to focus, I think, especially in trades and training in the north, because that's where the jobs are, and realistically, that's where the people are going to come from to fill those jobs. That also will require, I think, a different focus in K-12 education. You know, I go to a lot of graduation ceremonies, and you always get the same impression. There's an impression in the room sometimes that the people who've succeeded are the people who are going to go to UBC or UBCO or SFU or UVic or perhaps a university outside of the province. When the reality is, and I went to one of those institutions, I went to UBC, that today your ability to be creative is actually far greater often when you go and focus on trades and training. You can become an entrepreneur, you can work all over the world, you can own your own business, you can do almost anything you want, whereas a BA or a BSc might not lead to such variety of opportunity, but we are not, I don't think, in our entire system encouraging people to go in that direction. So I think that's the direction we need to go in. More training opportunities in the north, and that means that's the priority. Right? That means that's the priority. That means we don't spend money on other things, because that's the priority. Ensuring that people in the north have access to good paying jobs when they come in the north. Because if our future is people without jobs, and there's relatively high unemployment in many regions of the north, in spite of all the economic development that's happening, right? And jobs without people, where we have to essentially import labor, that's not a good future either economically or socially for the province, and it's something we as a generation can do something about. So I feel that's got to be the priority of government. So come here, speak to you in our first year, we'll talk about skills training. In our second year, talk about skills training. In our third year, talk about skills training. And that is why I think we've got to improve the democratic debate as well. Because that project is going to take government sustaining it, no matter who's elected, whether it's Premier Clark or myself or someone else. That's a project that's going to require a decade of government and industry action together to succeed on. And so we need to make that clear before the election so that people don't see immediate benefits after 6 months when it takes 2 or 3 or 4 years to train people, that they don't say, well, what are you doing? We have to campaign on it before the election, say that's what we're going to do, and that's going to be the #1 priority of an NDP government.
Many families and businesses depend on private investment for construction jobs within our communities. How do you plan on maintaining or increasing the level of private investment within BC?
Maintaining a AAA credit rating so we can attract investment is probably the single most important thing that we can do. And when I travel to Asia, I've been there 3 times on trade missions since last November, and we've, by the way, increased trade with China by 25% in 1 year. 25%. And we are doing a huge promotion in India now, reaching 90 million people through the Times of India group on a regular basis to promote British Columbia as an investment destination. Maintaining our AAA credit rating, balancing our budget, keeping government spending under control, and keeping taxes low. Last but not least, getting out of your way on the regulatory side. So I don't know if you saw this, but the Canadian Federation of Independent Business gave a letter grade to every province across the country, and we were the only province that got an A for cutting red tape. The only one. And I am really proud of that, because I understand just as much as you do how important it is we get out of the way if we want you to be able to make your investment. So those, I would say, are the 5 most important things we can do. And recognize, I think fundamentally, it ain't government that creates jobs. It's the private sector that creates jobs.
We have to build on our strengths as a society. So I'm going to bore you again, just briefly by mentioning skills training is my number one priority, because I think that's a key thing. That's something government can do. And I think if you meet, it doesn't matter whether you're in construction or manufacturing, you meet people, you know there are people today that could be hired if we had enough skilled labor in our province. And so that's got to be the key element to ensuring adequate levels of private sector investment. In fact, it's an impediment to such investment today. We obviously have to have a competitive tax regime. Everybody knows that. And there would be such a regime under the NDP, as I think there would be under the Liberals. We have to have an openness to investment and immigration. And that is, I think, a continuing challenge. It's one of the reasons why we have to ensure that there's adequate access to skills training here. But we also have to be open to people coming to BC with skills, staying in BC, raising their families in BC, voting in BC, growing old in BC. That's what we have to continue to be open to because it's critical to our economic success. On top of that, we're well located, and you see this in the world. On the Pacific Rim, we've had a historic trading relationship with Japan and with China that's important, and that trading relationship and an openness to that trading relationship has to continue. First Premier to go to China was Dave Barrett. Obviously, Premier Clark's been there, and that has been the continuing policy of successive government, but we have to continue that. In other words, build on our strengths and address some of our weaknesses. And our principal weakness in terms of the economy is that very question of whether if we have jobs available, we'll have people to fill those jobs, and that would be an ongoing priority of the government. I don't think it's the job of government these days to create jobs directly. We have to maintain, as you said, the base in which a successful communities function. That means people aren't going to come and start businesses in a small community if there's not adequate health care. They're not going to retire and spend their money in communities if there's not adequate health care. And they're not going to go to a community or stay in a community if the public education system isn't good. So we have to ensure the basis are right, the fundamentals are right. So the time to focus on them, the fundamentals of things, health, education, skills training, ensuring our tax regime is good, continuing to promote investment in our province, and going abroad to expand trade. If we do those things, then I think we'll be successful as an economy.
What is your position on holding contractors responsible for the location of publicly owned underground services?
Bill, is she talking about gas lines?
Basically, underground services.
So sewer,
All of it.
gas lines?
Well, essentially, we're the only province in the country where contractors may be responsible for its location for those underground services.
And what would you like us to do differently?
Well, basically, the idea is to have those identified by the owners.
Can we take a vote on this? Who supports Bill's position? Who thinks we should change our policy on this? Okay.
We've been very fortunate nobody's been killed, but you know it's coming. We would like to see the gas regulations change, requiring physical locates by gas companies and other infrastructure facility owners. That's the way it's done, not just in the rest of the country, but in all of North America.
Given the unanimity of the room on this one, we'll get to work on it. Bill, thank you.
I have people in your industry who struggle with this often because of their, and I think this reflects the whole industry, overwhelming concern with the safety of the community and of their workers. They often struggle with this question. We have different regulation here, obviously, than most jurisdictions with respect to responsibility. We need, our utilities have tended not to do what utilities have done generally in other jurisdictions. And what we'd like to see, I think that the initiative of the Construction Association here to promote the one-call system, BC one-call system, is one that I think others need to engage in. And, you know, we have a significant Crown Corporation, maybe some would argue the singular and most important company in the province over the last 40 years, BC Hydro, that needs to engage itself in that as well. And so what I'd propose to do, and I'm hopeful that the government's been working on this because it's been an issue for some time, and it's the kind of day-to-day issue that governments need to work on with industry, is that we sit down with, particularly with the utilities and the municipalities and you, and see if we can't take actions that, one, will improve safety, and having the people who put the lines there more responsible for the lines seems consistent with that. So we have to talk to them about that. So that's one, to improve safety, and two, to improve efficiency. Because if it's the case for you that you talk, as it sometimes is for people I know in construction, of significant delays in construction, that increases the cost, whether it's housing or industrial construction or infrastructure construction. It increases the overall cost of construction. So I think we can do better. I prefer myself not to add to the regulatory regime where it's not necessary, but it may be with policy we can work together for a better result. That may mean some change in regulation, but I think it's fair to say that our construction industry needs to have the opportunity to be competitive with other construction industries across the country and North America. And I think the initiative the association and the whole industry has taken, and others, not just the industry, but others have taken, the BC One Call is a good basis from which to start that discussion.
In British Columbia, 80% of small business is in the construction industry. What is your government's approach to working with small business in the construction industry?
Well, our approach, first of all, is I understand that there have been issues with procurement and the way we do procurement. So we are working with the BCCA. I completely agree with the issues that you've raised on that. We have to do our procurement in a way that works for the province. It's as inexpensive as possible for citizens, but I absolutely want to make sure that small business and medium-sized business have big opportunities when it comes to procurement here in the province. So I'm dedicated to fixing that. And you know, my new Chief of Staff, Dan Doyle, is also dedicated to fixing that. He's intimately familiar with how all of that works. So that we are going to fix, and we're going to make sure it works for you in collaboration with you. I think, though, the other big thing, obviously the larger issues for small business are, again, it's I hate to keep repeating myself, but I guess there's something to be said for consistency. Keep taxes low, get out of your way, let you innovate and imagine. Make sure that government regulation is at a minimum. So, for example, I've heard the opposition talk about an environmental bill of rights. Well, maybe that's good politics, but I think it's going to be terrible for the economy and for small business. Making sure that our labor code works for small business. The secret ballot for union certification is one example of something that we passionately support, that I passionately support. Making sure that we are doing everything we can to try and get out of your way by reducing regulation. That is the principal way that we can support small business all across the province. And then, of course, making sure that we're training people up and that there are people skilled and ready to be able to take the jobs. I feel like a broken record, but I think, when you got a plan, if you want the plan to work, you need to stick to the plan. And so we set out the plan, and that's what it is, and we're sticking with it. And that's why I think we're succeeding in British Columbia.
I think this comes down in some of the key issues that the industry has raised in recent times. There are some issues around procurement that are important. We have to make sure, to say when government spends money, that as much of that stays in the province as possible. That doesn't mean we can be irresponsible. I think it's possible, for example, there's lots of controversy about things like bundling projects. It's possible to gain the success of that and still have access to providers and companies here in British Columbia. It may be possible to do that and save money at the same time. And so I think what's critical is that when we do engage in construction, that local companies get a fair opportunity to bid on that construction. And if we do that in an open process, then communities will benefit more, not less, and there will be an ongoing, stable local expertise developed. I think that's a key way we can work with the small business sector in construction. This is a critical relationship. The relationship between the BC Construction Association and a government is a critical relationship, in my view. And often that relationship is complicated for small businesses. If you're a big business in construction, you have the means to deal with sometimes 9 or 10 or 11 different ministries. You may not like that, but you have the ability to do that because you have that capacity. You have more capacity. You can spend more time in it. Often the complexity of dealing with government and the way ministries are organized and then operating agencies of government are organized, from Partnerships BC to the Crown sector to the many ministries that have an interest in construction, makes it very difficult as a practical matter for small business to compete. So we have to do, and this government, the current government, to give them credit, has done some of these things. We have to ensure that there's an easier relationship between government and small business, that we have effectively in the construction sector much more one-stop shopping in that process. And so I think I've always supported, to the extent possible, local hire and local contractors as a means of public policy. We're in difficult financial times, and so we have to sometimes marry that with other financial arrangements to make it work. But we need to build a lot of infrastructure in the province over the next 20 years. That's going to involve government and private industry working together to see that that happens. And I think the relationship between your association in particular and the government will be critically important to making that succeed.
BC continues to face a shortage of skilled workers. How will your government increase support for construction trades training?
Cut trades training time in half. That's important. Make sure that we're continuing to open up more apprenticeships in the province. Make sure that the equipment on which people are training is modern and relevant for them. And most importantly, I think, reorienting our secondary system so that kids, when they are still in high school, as early as grade 9, are thinking about trades and have somewhere in school to go where that is valued. I think culturally, it's such a mistake for us to send kids to school and in so many implicit, quiet ways learn that there's a hierarchy amongst the jobs that the kids will pursue, and that the trades is somehow closer to the bottom than the university professor's job. And that is just absolutely wrong. We have to change that. And I have no doubt about it. It's going to be a big task to change that, because changing culture is hard. But we have to start, and we have to, first of all, recognize that it's a problem. So I do also really welcome the work that the Construction Association, the road builders are doing this, the truck loggers are doing this, getting engaged in local schools. The oil and gas folks are doing this, getting engaged in local schools and helping them build the programming that they need to get kids interested through the curriculum in those areas. So we have a big task ahead of us. But if you want to solve a problem, the first part is accepting that there's a problem, being willing to talk about it, and then being brave enough to be able to pursue those solutions. I think that's got to be at the core of a long-term solution to this problem. We are losing people to Alberta, as you know, not to Alberta in general. We're losing people to the oil sands, as you know. They pay very, very high wage rates. But British Columbia is still gaining in population. We have not experienced the kind of population loss that we saw in the 1990s. So people go to Alberta, but still we have a net gain in the number of people who come here, which is good. So we've got the people, we need to train them up. There is one more thing that I would add to that, which is immigration. If we play our cards right, we're going to have 1 million new jobs in British Columbia in the next 10 years. We only have 2/3 of the people of the bodies that we actually need to fill those jobs. If everybody was perfectly trained, we'd still be 30% short. Where will we get those people from? Yeah, we can get some of them from Alberta, Ontario, Newfoundland, across the country, but we need to welcome more immigrants to British Columbia and invite those people here to be a part of building our province, bring their skills and their families with them so that they can continue to grow our economy. That's an absolutely essential part of this. So, thank you, Sue. But the challenge for us in particular, it's a bit frustrating for me because immigration is one of the most important economic levers that a government has. We are the ones, the provincial governments drive the national economy, not the other way around. We need control of that lever, and we don't have it. It's a federally controlled area. So when you speak to your federal politicians, I want you to know I'm continuing to make that pitch to them for more provincial control over immigration, because we need those people to work, put them to work.
Boy, I like that question. I mean, it's significant. Your presentation to the Finance Committee suggested a short-term shortage of 37,000 workers, which is profound. and not one, even if we ramp up skills training sufficiently, we're going to probably be able to realize solely here in British Columbia. There are obviously some opportunities, other people in Canada coming here, and that's a significant part of it as well, and being open, as I say, to immigration, which we have to be, and have people coming here and staying here and living here is an important part of what's made Vancouver, Metro Vancouver, the region here, so successful. So I think I've talked about some of these. I won't throw it in general. I think obviously we need to increase spaces. We need to provide better supports for people, especially in apprenticeship programs, to improve completion rates, as they do in the province of Alberta. I think that those are critical questions. We need to make some changes in the K-12 system that I've talked about before, to drive people and to open up, especially the secondary students, to those programs. There's significant capital issues as well. We have in some of our colleges and institutes, we have equipment from the 1960s that is out of date. Students learning on Adams graders may not be prepared when they come in to employment, and effectively it means a huge loss for them if their training is not relevant to the job. So we need more coordination between business and post-secondary education institutes, not less, because of course it's a huge personal loss if you have training that isn't useful to you and expensive for business when someone comes in effectively trained and has to be retrained. So this is, I think, for government in the economy, the single and number one priority. It's got to be the one we're measured against. It is the main way that we're going to address growing inequality, giving people the skills they need to compete in the economy. We are not going to be able to address issues of inequality as we have at times in the past simply through the redistribution of wealth. We need a pre-distribution of wealth that allows people to have the power and the skills to succeed in the economy. So these are crucial questions. They're particularly challenging in Metro Vancouver, because Metro Vancouver, as all of you know who try and hire people, is also an expensive place to live. And therefore, we have some competitive challenges in Metro Vancouver in particular in attracting workers to our businesses. And that obviously puts upward pressure on wages, but doesn't leave the person in question necessarily better off than they would be elsewhere, because costs are so high here. So the skills training question you've correctly identified as the key question. And the final thing I'd say about it, as I said before, is that to succeed in that will require us working closely together. We are not going to succeed on this crucial question for our economy if we operate or dictate things from Victoria or from government offices. It will not succeed that way. And it requires, and the thing I like about it most, is it requires business and labor and government to work closely together to ensure we start to address these problems.
Green building plays a key role in BC's green economy. As contractors, we're fully aware of the benefits, as well as some of the current stumbling blocks in green construction. What do you see to be the single biggest challenge in terms of green building and sustainability, and how do you plan to address it?
Well, there are a couple of challenges in it. One of them is that demand is far outstripping supply at the moment. Another is that there isn't an affordable green building code here in British Columbia. So we've sort of adopted LEED as our standard. I think we need our own homegrown green building code here in the province. So Rich Coleman, as our Minister for Housing, is working on that right now, which would be something that's affordable and achievable and local for British Columbia, that really meets our specific regional requirements climate-wise as well. So that's underway, and I think that will make it, with the input of the Construction Association, that'll make it, it'll be something that's really usable for the industry and allow you to meet the demand that's out there. So we're working on that right now, and I think the absence of that has been a significant challenge.
If skills training is a principal economic issue, this broader issue of sustainability is crucial as well. I'm very positive about the possibility of LNG in Kitimat and other communities, particularly in the Northwest. It has huge potential value for our economy, but it also, especially if the government, as it appears to do now, changes its policy and decides to to allow the power for those projects to be inside the fence, also going to have a significant impact on emissions in our province. And if one day, as one might expect, there will be international treaties around this question, it can potentially affect our overall competitiveness and economic growth. What does that say? That means we have to make real savings in terms of emissions, both on the transportation and building side. So this makes this a key priority. But if you look at specific programs that have been put in place, if you look at the Clean Energy Act and the programs that have been enabled by that, whether they're in Colwood on Vancouver Island, the City of Vancouver's own program, we've had some challenges in terms of uptake. And if you look at the success of Live Smart, what it tells you is that it may be valuable not to have government promoting at a central level programs, but working with the construction sector to promote those programs. That may be the way to ensure that uptake in programs that exist, that may be good deals for consumers that we haven't seen the uptake on, are there. Equally, I think as we go along, as we continue to increase density, especially in Metro Vancouver, because that's what we're talking about here, we have to make sure that green building programs on the residential side that are largely available to single-family homeowners start to focus on multi-unit housing as well. That's where a lot of rental housing is, and that's where a lot of the opportunities are. Finally, I think, especially in the interior, to get outside of Vancouver, if we're talking about using the carbon tax in Vancouver for environmental purposes, that's clearly transportation and transit we're talking about. But in the rest of the province, we may be talking about other things, including the retrofitting of public buildings that regions will bring priorities to. And that green building process, it may be that it's not Vancouver that takes the lead in it province-wide. It may be that it's the regions that need to take the lead in it. That will certainly make government more efficient in those regions and is required as we address infrastructure problems everywhere in the province.
What are your plans for audits when the PST comes back? For example, will you put parameters on the retroactive audit process?
We are going to continue to do audits. Sorry about that. Because we have to make sure that there's a level playing field for business. And, you know, we have to make sure that the people who are abiding by the law aren't being penalized because there are other people who aren't. That really is government's job. And I know that if you've been the recipient of an audit, it's not a fun process. But it is, I think, essential to maintain that level playing field. And yes, we are going back to the PST on April 1st. And yes, I know that many people in the construction industry aren't happy about that. But we took a vote in British Columbia, and 60% of people said they wanted to go back, and that's what we're doing. We're going back. The good thing about that is that it will enhance people's belief that the democratic process works. And second, it's a certain date that people can plan around. I'm trying to find some other good news in that for you, but that's really all I got.
Well, as you know, the government has, it's always fun when you are in the Legislative Assembly of British Columbia, and everywhere I go, people ask me, why are you here? Why aren't you in Victoria? Of course, as you know, the legislature hasn't sat since last May 31st. That was 47 days last year, and this PST question, a lot of the PST questions ought to have been resolved last fall, but the government didn't want the accountability of the legislature, didn't call the legislature back. They've now released the PST legislation as draft legislation. Generally speaking, we support it. Generally speaking, it goes back 4 years in terms of audits. I think you've probably briefed everybody on that legislation. That seems like a good idea in terms of the transition period. My view generally is that in terms of legislative change, there were proposals, the report in 2007 and proposals in 2008, and some changes have been made, and then of course the whole system changed. The earth moved once, and then the earth moved twice, and now we're here where we're at. I'm very interested, I know our finance critic's very interested in meeting and working with you on some of the administrative parts of that, because some of that, now that we're coming back to the system, we're reliving some old issues, and we'd be absolutely prepared to do that. On legislative changes to the PST, I think probably in the short term, British Columbians might have had enough sales tax tinkering. So what we want is stability for a while, but on the administration side, I think there's lots we could do. It would have been, I think, desirable, in fact, not to recreate a PST administration, but the federal government wasn't interested in joining to us or taking allowing for the contracting out of that. So we're here now. Be happy to work and meet with you on that question.
My question relates to a report carried out for government by Deloitte Touche. The report indicates that the largest opportunity to save money would be to bundle projects such as new schools, school replacements, seismic upgrades into larger projects, attracting national and international competition. That it reduces participation by local contractors. Will your government implement bundling on publicly funded projects?
I don't think one size fits all ever works in a province like British Columbia. And I think this idea that bigger is always better is actually not accurate. I think it misses lots of the nuances of how the real economy works. So we are not pursuing a mass bundling for procurement, recognizing we want to make sure that the procurement that we do benefits not just the people that are going to be using the schools, but also the people that are building the schools and the people who work at those businesses. So that's what we're doing in the collaboration process with BCCA, is trying to make sure that the procurement process works both for taxpayers and for small business. So the answer to his question, no, I don't accept holus bolus, the report that Deloitte Touche made.
I think generally not. I mean, this issue has been raised with respect to Vancouver Island. It may be in some cases, for example, the case of the hospitals in Comox, Courtenay and Campbell River, for example, in those sorts of cases, that there's some utility in that, depending on what the model of financing the government has. That doesn't mean within those discussions that we need to use that particular bundling to exclude local businesses. I think we can address that question. I think as a general rule, moving to a broader bundling doesn't make sense because most projects aren't married in the sense that that project is. We have the SRO project in Vancouver. I think it's, I forget, 15, 16 projects there where some of the same things have happened largely for financing reasons, although we've seen a significant growth in the price, and the unit price is unbelievably high and frustrating to people who are involved in that. But that's the reality there. So I think what we need to do is not exclude options, because we have to be cost efficient, but ensure if we're going to move to bundling that it doesn't preclude the participation of local businesses. And in general, that's not my approach. So in general, my approach is not to favor the bundling of those projects.
Our staff have physical jobs, so safety is number one before they step into their vans or onto the work site. So a comprehensive safety program is critical to what we do. What is your government's future vision with respect to core and experience rating systems? How will you keep our industry safer?
I know safety is something that is really a top priority for every employer here, and that's part of how you sell your business to potential employees. It's part of how you attract investment. It's part of how you find clients and work to do. So that safety record, which I think we should all be very proud of the safety record of the BC construction industry. You have all done an absolutely magnificent job in making sure you're keeping your workers safe. But there's always more that we can do, and I know that WorkSafe has got some projects underway to try and improve the way we do that work. I wish I had more detail for you about where we're at with that. Now, what I will do, though, what I'll commit to do on this, is if I can work with the executive and Manley on some of the specifics of what you'd like us to do in terms of next steps on safety, I can make sure that we get you that information in the future.
I don't have any issues in principle with the direction the government's going in, which is to suggest that safer businesses pay less. It's a fundamental principle in the past of insurance generally, and that businesses, as we would with drivers, as we would with others who are less safe, would pay more. I don't have any problem with that principle. I think that you do have to be careful sometimes, as you see in all insurance systems. I won't bore you with my views on insurance. My dad was in that business he started at 15 and retired at 81, so won't bore you with my many views on insurance, but safety is clearly the number one priority on any job site. I think your industry's record is outstanding. We know the pain that everyone goes through. I was recently at the memorial for the Bentall deaths that still strike people decades later, and their impact on both the families involved, but also everybody involved in those things. And businesses are very focused on that. We have a challenge at WorkSafe, though. We have to acknowledge this. It's a competitiveness challenge. We're going to see premiums go up over the next 3 years to deal with largely with investment income loss. And the government, as it's tended to do, is pushing the problem past the election, because those increases don't even address current levels of expenditure. But as we've seen in just about every area now, the situation after the election will be much more difficult because the government has failed to address issues in the present. But I think at WorkSafe, as everywhere else, I think we have to focus on best practices. This is true both in the public and private sector as well. There are international systems of return to work that do way better in British Columbia, reduce costs for employees and produce better outcomes for employers and produce better outcomes from employees. The public sector has been slow in adopting them even in that jurisdiction up to now, although some agencies such as Vancouver Coastal Health have done a particularly good job. But we've got to focus on improving return to work, which has benefits all across the board in our WorkSafe system.
So just let me finish with this, because we've got a couple of 5 months of excitement, 90 days of excitement until people start voting. And when the writ is dropped, first day people can vote is the day that the writ is dropped on April 16th. And there's going to be a big debate, and it's going to be, I'm sure, a loud and boisterous campaign. And my son is a hockey player. He's a goalie for his hockey team. And we had a hockey game a while ago in Vancouver, and he had a really bad game. I don't know if any of you are sports parents. Probably all of you have been at one point in your lives. And he had an awful game. And in the middle of the game, his behavior was so bad that he got benched, which never happens to a goalie. So I drive him home. We're parked in front of the house, and I said to him, "Hamish, I need to understand what happened out there, because I couldn't be proud of that kind of behavior. I want to raise you to be a young man with character." He turns to me and he says, "Mom, the other kids were trash talking me while I was out there. They were saying bad things about me. They were saying bad things about you. And I got really upset." And so I got into my speech, "Listen, buddy, you've got to show character. And as the goalie for the team, you're the leader. They build their team around you. They need to have confidence that you are not going to be shaken. You've got to stand strong. You've got to have a thick skin, and you've got to just suck this stuff up. That's your job as a goalie." And he says, "But Mom, you don't understand. You don't know. You don't know what it's like to have people say bad things about you." And of course, I do know exactly what it's like to have bad things said about me. But I want you to know this. I really believe that what we are doing together is important for the future of our province and for our kids. And I'm going to persevere in standing up for my beliefs. I'm going to be honest with you about what they are. We might have legitimate disagreement about them sometimes, but I'll always tell you where I stand. And I think you deserve the right to know. This is going to be a competition of ideas, as it always is. I'm going to be honest about where I stand. I hold these beliefs very firmly. When people say bad things, I'm going to suck it up, and I'm going to persevere, and I'm going to do it because I really believe that my job is to support you and what you're doing in building our province and changing the future for our children. It's the private sector that does that. It's not government. It's government's job to support you. So thank you very much for all you do. I really appreciate it. Thank you very much, everybody.
I think the final thing is this, that one of the problems, if you think of the ITA or other changes brought about by the government that we have in BC, that's been a function of a somewhat polarized political culture is the idea that new governments come in and they want to put their own name on things, because by definition the name and the structure put in by the previous government is the previous government's. And I think we shouldn't do that. I think there are significant changes that we'd like to see at the ITA, but I'm not planning to blow it up or take a 2-year administrative change. Similarly, at other agencies such as WorkSafe and others, we have to build on the things that the current government has done well and address those they've done badly. And I am not going to make changes just to put my name on something, or Joe's name on something, or the NDP's name on something. I think that we can afford that less in these times. And so whether it's at WorkSafe or the ITA or other things, we've got to focus now in a time of limited resources on making changes and building on the strengths of our province, including the successes, and there have been some over 10 years, of the current government while addressing its weaknesses. That's our general approach, and I think it's the right approach for the times. So thank you very much. Thank you for all of your questions.